Good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, depending on where you are around the world. um, as per always, I do request that you mute yourselves when you're not talking and during the presentation. If you do have any comments or questions that you want to forward during the presentation, by all means, put them in the chat, or if it's relevant at the time, don't hesitate to interrupt. It is a PowerPoint presentation, and there are some notes and whatnot that will come after the PowerPoint presentation. All of these will be made available, posted on the website, and you can all see Mark Hart around there somewhere. Mark's got his picture up, but Mark will be doing the recording, posting that on Facebook, and also posting it on the OC Callers page, where you can go back and review all of the training sessions. Today's training session, we have Guido. Guido, you want to just wave so everybody can see you where you are there?
Here I am.
Guido Haas is one of many of the European callers who regularly contributes to our Zoom sessions, as well as to caller newsletters and instruction publications. He calls both square dance and contra dance in Europe. Although he started in Switzerland back in about 93, started calling in about 94, but in, I think it was early 2000, you moved to the Schleswig-Holstein area of Germany. For the last 7 years, Guido's been the square dance coordinator for ECTA, which is the European Callers and Teachers Association. He's the usual club caller of the Crazy Bumblebees in Hamburg. I noted one thing which has come up in conversation a fair bit, and Guido notes that he also calls for 2 senior citizens groups. One is a real hexagon group and one's just a regular square dance group. And why that stuck out in my head is it's usually only in Europe that they note if they call for a seniors group, it's outside the norm as opposed to actively promoting square dancing for everybody anywhere. Whereas in most places in the world, if you have a younger group or a youth group, that's what stands out as different. Guido's here to talk about a topic that's come up very, very regularly during many of our sessions, and that's working backward from an endpoint to the start, or what is commonly referred to in choreography as reverse engineering. So without giving too much away, please welcome Guido Haas.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to share my screen. And the first thing that you see is Australia, where we are right now, thanks to, and this is where I'm from. I'm just a little bit outside of Hamburg. Oops, this was a little bit too fast. Sometimes it changes where you want to be. You have here in the lower left corner, you have Hamburg, and I live about here. Let's get closer. This is where I reside.
So as Guido said, if everybody wants to come in for coffee this afternoon, just pop in.
Sure. I'm probably at home because of Corona. There won't be much I will doing this way. So let's close this. And okay, share screen, let's go.
I booked my flight. I'm on the way.
Okay, you're welcome. F5. Doesn't do what I want. Okay, we're talking about reverse engineering, and to make sure that I know what I'm talking about, I looked up Wikipedia and I found a lot of text which you can read on your own. The only thing is it's called back engineering and is a method where you deconstruct something you have to find the origin, and it is applicable in the fields of computer engineering, mechanical engineering, and square dance choreography. This is about You can read that in your own time. If you're looking at the presentation later at a video, you can pause it here and read it by yourself. What is the purpose of reverse engineering? It is something that most callers do, most callers should do, no matter which level of experience they have. And while we're going on there, you know what? This is going to be good. The purpose is to find a starting point for a certain type or of choreography. You need a specific phaser to start a get out. You need to develop a certain choreography snippet when you only know a fraction of it, or you remember the ending of a routine, but not the beginning. And you want to learn more about the calls you use. And I tell you, the last 2 weeks, I learned a lot about calls preparing this presentation. The scope for this presentation is finding the starting point for a get out. And I'd like to find the phaser for the last call before an element left or a right and left grand. Everything else, what you can do with re-engineering is just based on this, what you see in this presentation, by just one call. You just iterate and iterate and iterate until you get there. We'll do a little project I did a couple of years ago. I'll show you how I did that. Here I have a bunch of formations, which you don't need to examine further, but all these formations are about 94.68 something percent where you can find an element left spot and experience an element left when it is called. There are some more formations, there are some undocumented formations. There's a whole bunch of things, but these is probably the vast majority of what you encounter. When we go back, you see the general lines just under the N of element left. And I picked this formation and I took two arrangements for it. I have, if we take it in facing lines, we have the half shade arrangement and we have the zero arrangement of these possible formations. And now get overwhelmed. These are all the 16 formations, general lines that you have. This is about what we say general lines, these 16 formations. I picked out something because this is way too much. And if you wonder why there is no color in there, you wouldn't recognize the formations if they were in the yellow, blue, green, and red. We have the starting points. Here we have one version of a 3-in-1 line, and you see I have applied the colored figures to that general formation shape. And this is where you're gonna look for an element left, if possible. Here is an inverted line, the ends out, centers in, inverted line, the same thing. You see what I did with the proxy dancers above. I just applied them to the formation with their viewing direction. And here I have finally a right-hand ocean wave parallel. Also the same thing. All these are applied to the formation. When you try to backwards engineer, in most cases, it's quite easy to move through the cause properties, at least for most of them. I'm having two examples here. First is a star through. You just turn your back to your partner and unpass through. Since your checkers don't have hands, you don't have to worry about the handholds. And usually you don't even worry about left or right shoulder passes, because the only thing is you want to know where do you start the star through to get to your formation. This is one type of a call. The other type of calls are, for instance, run or trades. You don't need to do them backwards. You can do them forward, because a partner trade forward is the same thing as a partner trade backwards. You don't have to worry about that. And now let's look at some calls push backwards. Let me see. Where is that? I do have a little program here that is from the mid-90s. It was written by Lorenz Kuhle as a work in the university for some exam. And he opted to do a little computer animation program. And I picked out the zero arrangement, facing lines. And here I picked out the partner line, the line that was called zero line until not too long ago. And as I said, I have learned a lot about calls in the last 2 weeks, when I animated the uncalls. When I analyzed this thing, I found to get to this formation in this arrangement, there is over 100 possibilities you could call to get to this thing with just one call. So we don't look at all of them. You might have, as I said, you might have an inverted line, and we had the centers untrade. Look at it again, centers untrade. Let's do it forward. So this is one thing. A star through going backwards. So if you want to call an element left from here and now the pass through, but you want to have the facing lines as a starting point, now you know you could call star through, element left. Which is obviously not the best variation you could call, but this is not the purpose here, to find the best calls. That is your task when you try to re-engineer and try to find something that works for you. This here is just to show how do you go backwards. We have calls like right and left through. This is also a call you don't need to do backwards. You can do it forward, because it's the same thing. It really doesn't matter. There are some calls you have to do backwards, more or less. It's an all-8 circulate. These are just a couple of calls. Let's get back to facing lines again, just to show the principle. Where you encirculate, unencirculate. Unwheel around. There's a whole bunch of things you just have to analyze. I will make an Excel spreadsheet or a document with all the formations and pictures, because my own notation is probably not for everybody. So you can see where we start. And when we go to the hidden properties, you think it is really that easy to push back? Let me ask you a question. We do a bend the line here. Now we have facing lines again. If you unbend the line, what would you get? What do you think?
Same thing.
Maybe. Any other ideas?
It's ambiguous. It could be two possibilities.
Lines facing.
Two facing lines going the other direction.
Or a two-faced line.
Yeah, you have an unbend the line could go to 4 different formations. So when you have danced something and you've danced the bend the line and something else, turn the element left, but you don't recall where the bend the line started, you have 4 different possibilities to go there. What do you think?
Like two-faced line, lines out or lines in?
Let's look at the bend the line. We have the first bend the line. I can do forward. It's just a bend the line and we are facing lines again. We have bend the line to lines facing out. We have bend the line, unbend the line to a right-hand two-faced line. And we have unbend the line to a left-hand two-faced line. So you see there is 4 different possibilities when you unbend the line where you can end up. The same goes for cast off 3/4. It took me a while to get the right direction, moving those 3/4 backwards or forwards. But I have another treat. When you call, for instance, tag the line, face in. What do you think? How many starting formations could you have for tag the line, face in?
Any general line?
16. Given that 4 of them are a little awkward to dance, depending on what you call before, because the centers have the left hand connected in the middle. But a untag the line, and here a face out, untag the line, could end up in 16 different formations. Here they're sorted more or less alphabetically, starting with left-hand two-faced lines and going to right-hand ocean waves. 16 different ones. So moving backwards might be a little bit more difficult than it appears at first. Now we're going to do a little project. Because of the screen sharing option, here, just let me see.
Do you want your PowerPoint back?
Should be here.
There you
Is
go.
it back?
Yep. Yes.
Okay. Several years ago, I wanted to call an element left, and I get to this formation. The task, the goal that I had, the separate definition has been rewritten, and they have a function in there now I call separate in anything. We have the separate around 1 or 2 to a line, or separate around 1 or 2 come down the middle. We have the separate where you stop when you meet somebody, and we have separate with another call attached that you do in the moment you meet a certain person or whatever it is. And I was working with the separate in anything stuff, and I wanted to have a separate and an element left. But I wanted to everybody do the element left. So I have a left-hand ocean wave in the center. So everybody can element left. I did this pictures for myself. So there are no numbers in there. But if you speak English, the numbering system is quite easy. They're sorted in alphabetical order: blue, green, red, and yellow. So you don't have to worry about the numbers. Blue is the first, green the second, and so on. The goal was everybody has the original corner ready for an element left. The entire sequence is in the material that you will get after the presentation, so you don't have to worry about that. And now let's look at the animation. Let me get to the beginning. No. This is the ending formation in this case. You see the hit boys in the center in the left-hand ocean wave, each having the corner at the left hand, and the side boys are facing their corner on the outside. And as I said, I want to do a separate to an element left. Now let's look at unseparate. I had them facing out, and it's an awkward situation for the centers. So let's turn the wave a little. Let's unspin the top. From here, I see that everybody is having that the centers are having their corner, and the outsides are having their right-hand lady. But a three-quarter tag formation is not something that you can stay very long in. So let's do an unscoot back. Now we have a quarter tag formation. That is something very normal. And what I did is make it really normal. Now I have a double pass-through formation.
Is that why we're doing what we're doing?
Where
I want you to look at that and see what you think. I mean, they're all in place. I think they're all pretty much level.
okay. The boys are out of sequence, the girls are in sequence, I opted to do an unzoom to have the boys in sequence. And from here, I went back and say, make something I really can deal with. And I do have right-hand lady line facing out. I'll be honest, from here, I stopped working backwards back at the time because I can call forward to that. But here I'm going for, I do an unpass through. Still have the out of sequence right-hand lady line. Let's do an unstar through. And there's suddenly something very normal. We have a right-hand lady box out of sequence, also known as across the street box or X box. So from this very unusual formation, going back to something normal takes about 5 to 6 calls, and maybe you recognize a formation that you can deal with. This is a very, very simple thing, but as I said in the beginning, you need to know your calls. You need to know the definition. If police are interviewing a suspect, what do they do when they want to find out if they're telling the truth? There is one sure way. They ask the questions backwards. What did you before that? What did you before that? What did you before that? It's very hard to construct a lie backwards. And when you have the definitions not really ready, you will have a problem. But if you have the definition and you need to consult the definition, what does the call do? To move calls backwards, that's, I tell you, you learn a lot about calls. Going back to the presentation.
Yeah.
What you need to know is what I said, know the definition of the calls and know the possible starting formations. As you have seen in Tag the Line, there is 16, there is about 5 for chain down the line, there is 4 for cast off 3/4, there is 4 for bend the line, there is 2 for many others, and very, very many only have 1. Keep it simple. When you move backwards, don't relay the doozy. It's hard to push back a related doozy. It's hard to push back a spin chain exchange to gears. At least at the beginning, you don't want to do it. It's easier to look at a starting formation, at a starting phaser, move it forward to the end, look what's happening, write down the changes, and just move the changes back. Reverse engineering is a good way to create bad body flow. Know your call pairings that go well together. In my early calling career, I played some kind of domino. I had a cardboard. On the left half, I put one call. On the second half, I put a call that has a good body flow with that first call. The next card had that second call on the left side and another call on the right side. And so I could just put those cards in a line and have a good flowing sequence. And many of these call pairings are still in my head. So when I'm pushing backwards, many things I don't push because I know they're a bad flow. Find stations that you know. And I tell you from experience, it is better to call forward than to call backward. As soon as you identify something you can relate to, try to get forward to that position. Use backward engineering only for things that are unfamiliar or where you don't see a certain thing. If you remember the article I wrote about spin chain through in the August behind the mic, those half spin chain through and 3/4 spin chain through, I pushed backwards. I'm honest, I don't see that forward. I don't see from here, I have a 3/4 spin chain through, and then I can call an element left. Which ends face in element left, or end circulate face in everybody element left. I don't see that. I need to push back so I know the starting formation, but then I can call forward to it in most cases. And if you want to read something, there is a good article by Mel Wilkerson in the May 2018 edition of Behind the Mic, and more or less the same article in the November 2019 edition of Behind the Mic. And there is in a Collab product, the site and module resolution systems, backward re-engineering is mentioned on page 167. I found that. I didn't find that on the Collab website, but if you enter site and module resolution systems in Google, you will find a download link to the document, but you will not find it on Collab's website for whatever reason.
It is actually on the website. It's just not properly linked to where it is. It's a bugger to find, but if you can Google it directly, it'll come up.
Yeah, it's somewhere there, but I didn't find it. I was trying to find it, and after about an hour, I gave up and said no. Just if you enter this in Google site and module resolution systems, I'll only get one hit, a link to that document. And now it's time to question.
Wow. A lot of material to think about, Guido.
Yeah.
I'll just go through a few quick comments and questions in the chat. One that came up, the Alamand left positions, you've got more there than what Steve presented. Absolutely. Steve Turner did a presentation on the Alamand left talking about different positions. Which way are they facing? Guido, have you got the ability to put your initial diagram back up there with your various positions?
Sure. Just a moment.
The question was on the general lines, your first diagram.
Yep.
The one above it. Slide 6, yeah. Yeah, if you just put slide 6 up.
Slide 6, yep.
Yeah. On the top diagram, see the little black diamonds? Yep. That's the direction they're facing. So when it says on the bottom ones, that's just a general line. They could be facing either of those directions. That's what that was.
Their Janus faced.
Yeah. You said there's 16 formations from general lines. Why is that? If you note on the next slide. Slide 7.
Yeah, coming up. Here they come.
Yeah. Reason there's 16 and not 8 is because they include left hand and right hand.
Yep. lines in, lines facing out. Then you have on the top right hand, you have the left hand two-phase line, the right hand two-phase line. Then there's the left hand ocean wave and the right hand ocean wave. We have 8 different 3-in-1 lines.
Being pushed backwards for movements. Are there checker things for that? There's 3 questions there. Are there checker things, checker cheats for that? You also said practice and have 2 sets of checkers was said. It's a good idea to have them where they were and where you're going so that you have a remember where I was point. And then there was a question that came up. Are you going to provide your unlist? After that, you stated that you're going to mention, or you mentioned a spreadsheet with the unlist.
Yep.
Is that like the list? Is that like the list for the next call that is in some programs? What can I do next? And can you provide that?
Just a moment. Where do I have that? Here. That's the current list in the moment. I have a starting phaser in my own personal notation. I have the call, and I have the call that goes from this given starting formation. With this call, you go to a line facing in, everybody in sequence, and the hit boy is having his partner at his hand and facing his corner. This is my way of notation, and it's unique. So for me, there's only one way this line could be set up.
That was another question, was WFPC. If you notice that there while you got that up, 1 WFPC is number 1 man with partner facing corner. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. You said you were going to put a list of an end state with the uncalls that go with the end position. If you ever get that done collated, can you provide that?
What I will do, I was trying to do this with Excel, but in Excel it's very difficult to put pictures in and have the pictures formatted so as you want it. Excel has a mind of its own, and I need to do that in a different program. I will copy this list in a different program, and I have my starting phaser, I have my ending phaser, and I will attach the colored diagram to it, how this formation looks. So
I personally think you're putting an awful lot of work on that, but it's something that I don't think anybody has at this point done, a collated list for reverse engineering call sequences. So if you ever get that done, kudos to you, because that's a hell of a lot of work you've put in for yourself.
I told you, the last 2 weeks, I was learning a whole lot of things about calls. I was surprised. This list does not have some basic stuff like face in there, and it has 103 lines.
Yep.
And
there was a question, where do you get WinHash from? 3 questions.
It's no more available.
Not available anymore.
Lorenz Kuhle has written this in the 90s and marketed it for quite a while. Then he sold it to Bill Hyman of dosado.com, Supreme Audio. Then it gets sold to to Palomino, and Palomino Tom Dillon opted to not sell WinHash anymore and only sell Colorama somewhere in the early 2000s. And since then, it is no more available. I still have it. It's a 16-bit program, and it still runs on Windows 10. And since I have put many hours of work adding calls. I'm very reluctant to give it away, but it's no more available, unfortunately.
There was a question that come up, and I think it was just a misunderstanding. On your slide, you said this is a good way to create bad choreography. Why would you do that? I think the comment was more along the line, it is very easy to create bad choreography if you use reverse engineering. Don't just choose a movement and work backwards, but you got to work backwards, then work forward, and then go backwards again to make sure it flows. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct.
All right, so that covers all the questions and comments. I don't think I've missed any. So let's open up the floor. Anybody have any comments, questions, queries, points about reverse engineering? Have you used it? Any experience with it? How does it work for you?
Well, of course, I use reverse engineering like he's presented to create get out. I find actually using checkers and moving them around on the table is superior to using computers. And when you're trying to remember how things work, or you basically really do learn the calls backward and forward if you're moving checkers around. Checker sheets are fine, but it's a way to compartmentalize the calls and have an equivalent in your mind for the call. So when you're calling, you can very efficiently determine where you'll end up.
I use the computer here because it's easier to do it 3, 4, 5 times.
No, I'm not taking away anything that you did is fine.
No,
I'm just making the statement that I believe
I'm pushing checkers.
Yeah, okay.
I'm pushing checkers. I did all these uncalls I entered in the course of the last 2 weeks. So this is nothing. I will probably export them into a file and not have them in there anymore, but still have the chance to get them back if I need them. But no, pushing checkers is the thing to do. And my thing is have 3 sets of checkers, not just 2. Have a set of checkers where you start, have a set of checkers where you want to get to, and have 1 to push. And in 2 days' time, it's also a very helpful note that if you have pushed 1 call, take your smartphone, make a picture, so you can go back to that and you have all the states in between of your choreography.
I just noticed one thing that just came up in the chat window that really needs some clarification. This is from Barry Wanson. Thank you, Barry, for the comment on the fabulous job of reformatting, but I have a little bit of query about all that lots of free time to do stuff. But the sentiment is there, as was noticed. Behind the Mic magazine is always looking for new issues and ideas, and it's the same as if there's anything that you want covered from these sessions, or if there's anything from BTM that you want covered in a session, works both ways. So please let us know. This is how Guido's presentation actually came up on reverse engineering. Many multiple comments, and Guido was talking about it. And I said about 4 or 5 weeks ago, geez, Guido, that sounds like it'd be a great session for you to present. And I gave him a date and then pretty much signed him off so he couldn't say no.
Yeah.
So I think thank you very much. I think it's given everybody a lot to think of. We do look at reverse engineering a lot of the time to work backwards from a get out, but it has a lot of really great applications, from adapting singing calls to creating modules. As Guido noted from what he did there, he worked back to a cross the street box or a right hand lady box. You could easily take it to any ending formation or any setup that you want. You want a corner swing in a right-hand quadrant, reverse engineer it back to get there. So the principle is exactly the same. So very well done. Let's open the floor up.
Well, Mel, okay.
All right, John, and then
Yeah, well, one of your exercises, Mel, if you remember, I reverse engineered what you put down for the starting thing.
Yep.
So I could figure out how you got there. Reverse engineering is kind of neat, but there's no guarantee with all those different combinations that you're going to do it exactly the way the person who got to that formation got there. So, I mean, there's no guarantees when you reverse engineer it that you're going to create exactly what the original person did to get to the formation you want.
No,
But
absolutely correct. And that's what Guido was saying, in that if you have a bend the line, there's 4 possibilities that you could have got there from. Where you choose to work back from works all the way out.
Also, it doesn't matter if you, sometimes you just need it for figure out how to use a call on a singing call.
Yep.
That's what I was about to say. About the only times I've ever worked a call backwards is to make sure that, now I'll give you one instance that I had back in the days when we had the quarterly movements. The older callers will remember that. They had a movement come out, and I was supposed to do a weekend with some other caller down in Monterey Peninsula. I don't remember his name, Flippo or something like that. But I wanted to work in this new quarterly movement. So I like my singing call figures to swing where they can get a full promenade. Well, this was kind of a weird one. Usually the movements, they resolve pretty simply using standard head square through, blah, blah, blah. It gets you into that 0 box or corner box and makes it easy to tuck it in. But this particular one was tough. So I did get my dolls out and I worked them all backward and everything from the corner box with a full promenade. Took it that weekend and I called it, and boy, I'll tell you what, Marshall Flippo says, "Where'd you get that?" I said, "Well, I worked it out with my dolls. Give it to me, give it to me." And of course, from there, he gave it to a couple of other fairly unknown callers. I don't know, Ken Bauer and Haig, different guys like that. And next thing you knew, it was on a plus list. Spin, Chain, and Exchange the Gears was the name of it. I really kind of wish that I'd never done it, actually, because I've never really liked the figure, and then I wound up having to use it forever after that. But it was different because the setup, usually I would say, okay, what do I have to do in order to get this gal in this position at the end of it? Well, the setup for that was kind of tough. And actually, to begin with, I said, okay, head star through, pass through, step 2 wave, spin, chain, and exchange a gear, da, 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 da. And it worked out so well. And then Kenny, he changed the head star through, pass through to a heads pass the ocean and extend. And the figure flew, and as far as I know, it's still being used pretty much for that particular movement. But yeah, reverse engineering works very nicely for singing call figures if you have something in particular that you want to use for it. Thank you.
The sequence I reverse engineered until the across the street box. After I had this one done, I was thinking about it. I said, how must the dancers be that they are in their home spots after the element left? And then I needed to tilt the formation about 45 degrees so that everybody starts the element left more or less at their home position. And I had to work backwards. I knew quite a bit, but then I had the problem, I need to get the square in diagonal. So like everybody face your corner, star through, and now get forward to the appropriate position to, like, I have the bridge from one side and I have a part of the bridge from the other side, and they have to meet in the middle somewhere, and probably at the, and possibly at the same height. So this is something where you use backward engineering also. I wanted to have the element left in everybody at home. And I used that at a workshop I called once. And this was a thing where I did, without bragging, this was one of the things where I did excel on my talents by ending this with the music. So to start to call this, end it, and the music stops. When you say, now you're home, and the music goes bum bum. This, I was lucky there, but it's still, this gives a thrill. If you have something like this, you get the dancers to call something, to dance something. And I tell you, this was left-hand choreography. Most dancers will struggle with left-hand choreography, especially if it's more than 3 or 4 calls. And then put that left-hand diagonal on diagonal squares. That's very, very difficult for many, many dancers.
Let me add something to what I said there. It's been several months since I've called a dance. There is a 2 ladies chain in that figure. That was part of the reason that the normal head square through or what have you wouldn't work out. For that spin chain and exchange of gears. Had to have the head ladies chain size past the ocean extent. Something along that line, but yeah.
I want to add something to what you said there, Daryl. When that came out as a quarterly, which was, a couple of years ago, it soon became part of the list, the accepted list, and one of the norms. It wasn't the fact it was spin chain and exchange the gears. It's the fact that somebody took the time to actually write some choreography that worked, that was enjoyable, that was fun to dance, that it became popular. This is just it's not so much a tongue-in-cheek as a reality comment, but wouldn't it be nice if our current lists of square dance movements and everything else callers would take and write some smooth, enjoyable choreography to use the whole thing instead of avoiding them? All those movements that don't get seen very often.
Exactly. Yeah. But I like the point that you're making because without a good, easy, usable singing call figure, no new movement sticks around, period. We saw walk and dodge come and go. We saw scoot back come and go. We saw so many movements that came and they enjoyed a little bit of popularity, but they didn't stick around until it started coming out on singing calls with a very standard figure that was easy for everybody to get through. Scoot back, if all you ever had was a scoot back from a corner box, it never would have stuck around and didn't until we get, of course, at the time we had curly cue instead of touch quarter. But if you can imagine head square through, touch curly cue, scoot back, boys run, square through 3. When that figure came out, that's when scoot back stuck. Till you got a touch quarter, walk and dodge, partner trade, reverse flutter, blah, blah, blah. Till those particular figures, just like that came out, those movements came and went. But a walk and dodge from a corner box wave, it came and went. It was fun for a little bit, but till it came out in those singing calls, didn't stick.
Yep. I believe, Peter, were you waving or were you just moving your hand there earlier? Peter and Denise? No? Okay. I can actually see everybody on the screen today, so I...
48 participants.
Yeah. Has anybody got any comments or questions for Guido on reverse engineering?
I'd like to make a comment, Mel.
Go ahead, Alan.
There's a couple of advantages that really I find from reverse engineering. And I think you were there the night we worked on walk and dodge so that you could finish at home in a square.
Mm.
And reverse engineering was involved in that, of course.
And
But
I
it
would like
also,
to add that Barry still didn't open that bottle of Crown Royal that he got before we did that.
right. But when you go through a process of reverse engineering, you remember that get out.
Yes.
Because you have engineered it into your brain in a way, so that yeah, you might forget some elements of it, but it comes back very quick. And so yeah, the process is well worthwhile just from that point of view, being able to remember the calls and the sequence that they went. Yeah. But Guido, very, very stimulating. You certainly raised some things I didn't think about while I was playing with reverse engineering, and that is worrying about just how many combinations that you might find yourself tracking back on. And certainly if you found yourself going too many calls before you found a good get out spot to work from, maybe go back and then look at some of those other avenues. They might lead you to the correct spot quicker. And so they're really good advice. Thanks very much.
Okay, good.
I use that spin chain and exchange of gears different, reverse engineered for our release of Gilligan's Island, so that we could be able to use all of the words in the Professor and Marianne here on Gilligan's Island. Anyway, all those words I had to do a different setup to use up the first part of the music, so that we could go straight into Swing and Promenade after singing all the words. So it was nice to be able to reverse engineer.
Yeah, well, somebody said talking about reverse engineering is going to be opening up a can of worms. I opened up a can of worms at work, and all I got was a bunch of worms sitting there on the desk. I didn't see what the big thing was. So, Guido, I would love to say thank you very, very much. We've now just hit the hour mark. It was an excellent presentation. The floor is still open for discussion, but for those of you that do need to tune out or head off, as always, Mark is going to have the recordings up on the Facebook page and also put them on the OC Callers page. I will be posting the presentations out to those that want them. If you want to just hang around for a couple minutes, I'll put those into the chat window as well. And the floor is open on anything Guido said or anything else that anybody wants to discuss.
For opening a can of worms, I don't think re-engineering is opening a can of worms, because it's more or less like reading Tolstoy. It's a difficult matter. It's not something like taking a Mickey Mouse paperback and read it just for fun. No, re-engineering is something that when you start it, you really put a lot of brain into it, because it's not that easy. Yeah, there are some easy things like an unpass through or an all-A circulate from parallel ocean waves or two-phase lines. That's all easy. But when you go into tag the line stuff, or difficult for me was to animate the cast of the quarters backwards to get to the 4 different formation. That was really difficult, and I need to do a model with my hands. In which way do I have to turn them? It's quite difficult, and so it's not really a kind of worms you open, and it's something that many will put aside for quite a while until there is the one thing, like I once experienced at a dance, a sequence. There was a girls straight, girls run, boys straight, boys run, half sachet chain down the line. And then I had to reverse engineer how is the setup? Or something I had to, in your article, Mel, you had the centers walk and dodge and run twice. Centers walk and dodge, centers run, centers walk and dodge, and centers run. In your,
Yeah.
I did the same thing, but I did it for a singing call, and I had until I found out how this thing is working. I had it as the last sequence in a singing call, and then the original heads fold and swing. Now it's your turn to re-engineer stuff, but this is what it makes fun.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for taking your time for doing that. And I'm going to thank you in advance for the amount of work, because I know the amount of work that's going to be in that little project you set for yourself of creating an unlist to actually look at and work backwards.
Well, I have the list.
Yeah. So anybody else, if you have any questions, any comments, any points, the floor is open. If there's something you want to look at specifically, if you want to look at any specific choreography, we can do that. Or if you have any questions for general discussion, we can do that as well.
I'm going to say what I always say whenever the subject of dolls comes up, but especially when you're doing them backwards, I do them on paper. Try doing them on paper. That's the least cumbersome way that I know to do it.
Yeah.
Yes,
We do that on paper.
on paper too. Yes. Can we say congratulations, Guido? Nicely done.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon.
It's bedtime. It's bedtime.
Yes, we've hit midnight.
Now I have it's 1 o'clock here. Now I have to wait until 3 o'clock. It's 2 o'clock again.
I got the feeling.
I don't, just letting everybody, I don't have a session scheduled for next week or the following week. I'm still waiting for some words from a few people. But if we do have it next week, just note that there are a number of places in the US and in Europe that the time is changing either this weekend or next weekend. So have a look, not just my presentation, but also the class sessions, as well as Don Beck and Dan Lake's presentations. Just have a look to make sure that you check the time so you don't miss the actual presentations with the time changes that are happening.
Okay.
Right. Okay. Farewell.
Can I just ask Guido? I haven't checked the lists yet. I just downloaded them. But do they contain also if the status or grouping is changed for different calls? I mean, if you have a spin chain and exchange the gears, I know that will probably change from some kind of partner relation to a corner or right and lady relation.
The only thing I've done so far is how do I get to a zero line using a single call. I haven't done all the calls in that matter to backward engineer, but I might write an article in Behind the Mic in a couple of months.
I don't think you need to, because they probably won't matter if you do them forward or backward, but it might be an interesting note that this also changes the, well, how should I put it, status, that this is, if you start from a partner line, you might end up in corner or
but
right and lady lines.
Sometimes such a list might be of interest because many people don't know little things like that a load the boat is nothing but a star through plus an A train 4 at the same time. So, well, let me rephrase that. It's a pass the ocean, all I circulate twice and do I do. To have
or slide through.
Yeah.
Right. Normal.
if you have other arrangements, it's better
Yeah.
you use it past the ocean,
Yeah.
because many people cannot relate to a if you use a call name by just meaning the action.
Pass through and place the partner. That's the same thing.
That's when I say a bend the line is nothing but a copper circulate. And many people, many callers cannot relate. They see a copper circulate, you have to go forward, and it's not a lateral movement. But if you say, okay, let's have a half a wheel around, copper circulate, and a half a reverse wheel around, just to make it. But it's still a once you and I'm missing the English word here. Once you get away from the definition and the normal meaning of the call into a meta level of the call, it's much easier to talk. But the person on the other side needs to be able to understand that you're just a level higher, and looking down and say, like in the general line, a general line is 16 different parallel lines, but for many people you have to show the 16 lines before they believe it, because they're not able to see. They haven't been diving into this matter so deep.
And while those 16 different formations might be able to call a swing and promenade your corner from, they are probably not always the best way to put an element left in.
Yeah, it's like what is it? Read the definition of element left again, and you know why I can call element from the right hand. From you can call everybody element left from right hand two-phase right hand ocean waves, because the element left says you 90 degrees or less turn to your corner. So
theoretically,
that takes us back to Chris Stacy's presentation from last week. Yes, you can, but really, should you?
This is the other thing.
I just noted that because Chris just posted. He's updated some of the presentation notes from his presentation last week, and they can be found at his website, which is the link is posted there on the in the chat window.
If you go on to Call-O-Rama, the newer version, and when you put the call in, you can actually drag the call backwards. So you put your square through four, whatever you want to do, and just do the call, and then you bring it back across and see it going backwards. So it gives something to work the mind a little bit easier with.
Also
trying to work
terminations.
checkers backwards.
You can do the same thing in terminations, but the problem or the big difference is you have to work forward before you can work backwards. The joy of reverse engineering is you take an end state and an idea and you work backwards from that end state to see what's the best way to get me to some place where I know where I want to be to make this call. Like Daryl was saying, for the spin chain and exchange the gears, it's a 4 ladies chain. What am I going to do? There's my end state. I know what it does. Okay, what am I going to do to get to a point where I know I can do that ladies chain to fix it right at the beginning? You know, it's that kind of a thing. And that's the big strength of reverse engineering something. You know where you're ending, you know what you want to do, and you know how you want to set it up. Then you can take it to where you want to be. Anything before that is gravy.
Okay.
Nice.
Nice
job,
I see you
Guido.
nodding your head back there. Did you have a comment? No?
Nice job, Guido. That's a heck of a lot of work that you put into something like that. Yeah, I probably wouldn't have done that one, but you did a good job with it. I am going to sign off here, but I want to say thanks, everybody. And it's always good to see my old friends. And old meaning more than one thing all at the same time. We'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye, Daryl.
See you, Daryl.
Take care, Daryl.
Hey, Barry, I do have a question for you.
Yep.
Is that hat a gimmick hat, or is your head just swelling up because of a big ego these days?
don't know where I got this one. This is a fairly new one. Oh yeah, from Vinnie's.
From Vinnie's. Nice.
From Vinnie's. That's St. Vincent de Paul. The Americans would know them as thrift shops.
Salvation Army.
Yeah, Salvation Army type.
Kind of thing.
Great place to shop.
So you washed it and it shrunk.
Yeah.
So Barry, do you have a special room for all your hats? Like you've got different rooms with different themes?
Oh my God. No. How much time have you got to answer that question, Roz?
There.
Just a shelf. Just a shelf.
I don't
So,
believe that.
somehow, because of the, I guess because of the Crocodile Dundee movie, when he said that, all I could picture was him opening up a closet in the house with this immensely long shelf, and him going, "Now that's a shelf."
It is a big shelf in a very large walk-in closet.
Yeah, most people would call the walk-in closet a master bedroom extended, but it's still a walk-in closet.
Yeah.
I haven't been to Barry's, but I believe he's got rooms that is a room.
Yeah, we do have a fairly large house, you know. And when we go to vacation, we go to different rooms. That's the idea, you know, and it's great because you can sleep in, you know, the 5 bedrooms. You can sleep in a different room every night. You know, it's wonderful.
Yeah, I think the closest comparison you could get to Barry's house is watch an episode of Doctor Who.
Oh, jeez.
Because the house doesn't look that big from the outside, but it seems to go on forever.
I thought I'd join Barry and put where actually I put it on because didn't want Rod to start complaining about the glare. Rod and I go back forever. I think we both. I had hair back.
I gotta
then.
get my sunglasses back on.
Oh, shut up. Here, can I just reach
Hey,
in?
Bill, I got a picture on my phone. I call it a dance. And the round dance cure, one of the other callers and one of the dancers all bowed to me. Their arms locked. Of course, every one of them had a shaved head. And I said, well, somebody's going to have to call the next tip because I can't see the call.
I had a dance once up there at Roseville at Royer Park, and there was a square off to at my 2 o'clock, and it was 4 couples that I knew, and they were all the guys had varied degree of baldness, and I just looked down at them and I said, "Can you guys shift your square to the right? The glare is killing me."
Y'all take care. I gotta go.
Take care, Rod. Nice to see you.
Bye, Rod.
I'm still trying to hornswoggle you to come in and make a presentation there, Rod.
Don't volunteer. I have 2 Saturdays are hard for me because family usually comes by, but
take care. So as I said, the floor is open. If anybody wanted to look at something, talk about anything in particular, or had any questions, or if you have any suggestions or want to have articles from any of these things written up in Behind the Mic, or vice versa, stuff from Behind the Mic done as a presentation and discuss it in depth, by all means, make your submissions, throw them forward, and we'll see what we can do. We try and shop for as many as we can to make these presentations available.
Mel, before the presentation, there was discussion about SSD. I'm not sure who the person was that said they'd tried it and had problems, but I think Betsy's had a lot of success with SSD. I don't know whether that call is still on though.
Well, just to bring everybody else's up, at the beginning there was a discussion on SSD program. It was in line with the restarting of square dancing, as opposed to our levels SSD and the aspect of social dancing, whereas many callers are using the SSD program as a way to jumpstart square dancing so they can refill their plus clubs. That is not what SSD was about. It wasn't even to do the mainstream clubs or to restart modern Western square dancing just as a cheap, fast way of getting more dancers on the floor so we can get them up and get them into the levels and back into the grist mill. It was about SSD being a standalone social program where dancers can come, have fun, and enjoy the social aspect of square dancing without having to be pictured or pigeonholed into I'm a plus dancer, I'm better than you, or I'm an advanced dancer, I'm better than you. There's a number of callers that are having a lot of success with it, but the discussion centered around we as callers are the only people that can make the return to square dancing work. And we, unless all callers work together, that's never going to happen because everybody's afraid of losing it and somebody starting dancers being poached to the next club, vice versa, or they're taking the wrong approach to go back to where I can fill my own class and coffers as opposed to sustain the activity. That's just a summary of about a 20-minute discussion. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Betsy.
I was just going to say, I have not really been working with SSD. I was working with the condensed teaching order, which kind of came out before SSD and was a means. It was ultimately a means to get people on the dance floor before they'd finished every single call in the mainstream list, but it still felt like the mainstream dances that you normally do because it utilized the most common ones, and early on it introduced calls that were normally used at mainstream dances before you would have gotten them in the traditional teaching order, and in combinations that allowed you to make it feel like a full mainstream dance, even though you weren't calling certain things. And I'll tell you, on that particular list, the thing that got me the most, that I had the most mistakes with, because I should have left it out and I didn't, was star through versus slide through. Because while SSD has both, the condensed teaching order only has slide through. And to get my mouth to only call slide through was really a problem for a while. Now, I'll say something different than Mel. Where you are in the world can have an influence on whether or not you can use SSD to restart and revitalize square dancing, because it depends partially on who's running the clubs. In Australia, as I understand it, each caller has their own club. Or anyway, they're not. What?
For the most part, I believe.
Yeah. Whereas here in the U.S., you have clubs that are run by a caller. If the caller starts a club and they run the club and they don't turn it over to officers, then it's a caller-run club. But most of the clubs are run by officers, by dancers, and it is some of the dancers, especially here in the US, I'll speak to that, who have invested status in being a plus dancer as opposed to a mainstream dancer or an advanced dancer or whatever. And so if those dancers, if we can't get those dancer leaders, the club officers, to accept the SSD as a social thing, then you either, the caller who would have to start a new club and make it work that way, or it wouldn't work for that group.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's the thing. When I was looking at the program of SSD, I thought there's something missing in the program. I call that incentive calls. Like 4 or 5 calls that are no call alert program. So if you dance SSD, you have 4 or 5 calls that you're going to miss out when you go somewhere else. And I'm talking as calls, I think something like a start the route or a grand flutter or whatever. You will call a 64 or 32 beat figure, 4 or 5 of them that have no other purpose than to have fun for the dancers, because they are not choreographically relevant. Like a square through, you can do a lot of things with square through with grand square, but you cannot do really much with a grand parade or a starter route. You don't have any. You can halve it maybe, yeah, but that's it. And if the dancers like these calls and like to dance them because they're longer figures, and usually that's the thing that dancers like, dancing a longer sequence of movements without the interruption of the caller, then the dancers will miss something when they go into Dance Plus. So they will come back for these calls if they're a regular part of the program. And something like this is missing if you want to have a program that's not in the program stepladder. My opinion.
I don't think SSD is designed to go from SSD to Plus. I mean, to me, it looks like SSD, I mean, it's a danceable program, but if someone wants to go further, well, you'd go into like an intermediate where they'd get all the things they miss out on in a mainstream level. So you'd have that section after the SSD if they wish to, and some may not.
Yeah, even in the SSD program, the program itself is designed as a standalone program, but it's also designed that other movements, a good example, spin the top, are what they call the disposables. If you're going to use something that's not on the program in an evening, well, you use a disposable call. So you could do a quick walkthrough of spin the top, and that could be one of your features for the evening using a full SSD program. And all of the movements are there. The problem we have is very much like what Betsy was saying. A lot of it is driven. We want dancer run clubs want to fill their clubs again. If you're going to run an SSD program and you're hired to do that to fill the floor, you're probably also hired to get those dancers going up into the plus group as fast as you can, which is where we have the initial problem right now, which is what was pointed out by Steve Avery in the other session and a few others. I think it was Steve Avery, or it could have been Scott, sorry, that in these types of things. There have been a number of callers that said, well, I do the SSD program, but I don't use those movements. I use these ones instead because they're more popular in our area. There was 4 that said, well, we're doing an SSD program, but we've modified it so that we could have relay the do seed, load the boat, and coordinate on it. And my response was, well, then you're not doing an SSD program. Quite simple. That's the end. And they say, oh yeah, but it's an SSD, it's 50 movements. I says, it's not SSD. It's your program to fill your hall so your dancers could dance, and you'll pick up the rest of it later. The SSD program actually has written in there is, this is the program, this is what you can dance. And then separate from that, you can introduce the rest of the mainstream program. You can do that on a different night, or you can do them as disposable calls that you can bring back periodically so that they're exposed to them. But SSD, if you go to an SSD dance, you've got a fixed list. It's an administrative list of danceable movements that you can generate after 12 to 14 weeks. You can go to anything that's advertised SSD and say, I can dance that program. That's what basic mainstream and plus were, was an administrative list that says it's advertised. I can dance that program from pretty standard positions and a few others. But we lost that focus as callers a long time ago. And it's only callers if we all work together and agree that we can get back. And as was pointed out, you're never going to get all callers to agree to that.
No, and that's why they had developed first the condensed teaching order, which was designed to get people on the floor and dancing, because they need the floor time before they're comfortable and competent. If you're going to keep the lessons short, they need to get out on and dance as if they were in a club or as if they're at an open dance. And if the callers, well, for one thing, if the callers don't aren't flexible enough to limit their calls to the ones on the program, then they're never going to be able to call it comfortably, and it will not feel like dancing.
I think the biggest thing that was pointed out with the SSD list was there are more movement. Oh God, I wish I knew who said this. There is more movements on the SSD list than there was in the 70s on the basic and mainstream list, but we could only get about 17,000 to 25,000 at the big dances then, but we didn't have as many movements as we do now on the SSD list. Now think about that for a minute, because the activities that were there, it wasn't that there was more activities, there was different activities, but dancers made the time to go to this because it was a big social festival. It wasn't about the choreography. It wasn't about the callers saying, wow. Callers did that by giving everybody a good time, and they all used the same material. And there was a lot less of it back then. So I guess we've hit that pregnant pause in the discussion.
Oh, yeah.
As I said, the floor is open on any topic of interest. I may not be the person to answer it, but I'm sure there's enough experience in the room. I see Howard and Barry and Betsy. I mean, amongst them, they probably got 60 times the amount of experience that I have. So I'm sure they can be able to answer a number of questions. I see Alan up there.
Some may not be aware, we start in a week's time, restart in a week's time. So we're trying to get 6 weeks of dancing in before Christmas when we go to the break. We think we've got it covered here. We're pretty safe. So we are going to trial dancing for the next 6 weeks, starting next week.
I had planned to come down and visit you guys before the holidays, but I don't think that's going to be a possibility because I'm still waiting for a phone call from the neurosurgeon. So I wish you all the best with it.
Yeah, tell me, Mel, somebody said that Malcolm, is it, that was involved with the Wodonga group, his mum is not well, and I didn't realize that she was actually his carer. Is that true?
Well, there was sort of a mutual care, but she was his care, but she went into a home and he went with her into the home. And since then, Wodonga's gone through a number of iterations of internal politics, which is really not generally the discussion, but he is still trying to keep the club going. But I haven't heard from Malcolm in quite a while. He's sort of gone dark for the last few months. Right. So I couldn't really give you a status update.
Okay.
I'd like to hear from people who might have some experience with multi-level dances. I have some experience with it, but I think it was in just really one particular kind of situation. And but I'd just like to hear anybody else that's done regular multi-level dances and how they felt those went.
Clarification, Chris, are you talking multi-level dances as in 3 halls, 3 levels, or 2 or 3 levels in one hall on one night?
Well, really, I was thinking of just all in one hall. So, for example, alternating mainstream and plus, or maybe in the future, alternating SSD and plus, or something like that.
In Kentucky, that's exactly what their dances are. They're primarily mainstream, and they'll have 2 or 3 plus tips during the course of the night.
Just about all Australian clubs multi-level in a way. They often are mainstream and plus clubs, and so yeah, it's difficult. It's never ideal, and you can never please all of your dancers all of the time, and that's the difficulty of multi-level clubs. If you're fortunate to have a breakout hall where you could have part of your evening separate levels and then have a get together and dance brackets before supper or something like that, so that you've really got a club that's joined together but not separate. We've tried all those, and it's never ideal, but you do your best.
Jeff has C1A and plus in one night.
So here in Scandinavia, at least, we more or less always have multi-level clubs. So it's every other dance is at basic or the lowest level of the floor, and then we add a few plus A1 tips or whatever it might be.
One of the clubs that I called for a fair amount in recent years, their format was class level, which might be all the way up to mainstream if they finish that much, but it's whatever the class is dancing that week. And then the next tip is going to be plus, and the next tip is going to be A2. And we might vary a little bit depending on how many. At the front, we like to bias it more towards the having more of the class level tips because this is occurring right after the class met, and then how many advanced or whatever other tips we do throughout the evening depends on sort of how many people are there. But it seems like it worked out great. The one thing for the caller is that there's just basically no rest for the caller until you get maybe an announcement break or something. But you just got to, you finish one tip and like boom, it's time for the next tip right away. So it's quite a workout.
I found doing the multiple.
To clarify that, Chris, you do the class sessions, the whole class, and then it's a club dance, class level, advanced, mainstream, whatever. Do you alternate tips, class level, advanced, class level plus, class level challenge, whatever? Or is it just
right? Yeah, the exact order they come in depends on which part of the evening we're in and how many people at each level are there. But we ran the class first if there's a class going on, and and then it's basically 3 levels. And let's do it in the case of when it was the class. So you have your class hour before the dance starts. Then everybody starts showing up for the dance, and the first tip is class level, and then we do a plus tip, and then we probably do another class level tip, and then maybe we do an A2 or another plus, and go on from there. At some point, the class people, they leave early because they've already been there a whole extra hour. But I think it's applicable even if you don't have the class. And I was just wondering, sort of what formats people have tried, and if they I've seen it work out very well, but I also hear whenever that sort of thing gets mentioned, a lot of people say, "Oh no, they'll never go for that. They need to have plus every single tip." And I'm not so convinced that that most dancers are that are that picky in that way.
Well, the thing about
I do know that there are some clubs in the States that are that picky that way. I know from what we've done, I always make sure that my star tips, which I hate that terminology, but that's what I call it. You're creating a segregation of we can dance at higher level than you, or we can dance a better program than you when you do that kind of thing. So I always make those alternating tips shorter. Like it's a 4-minute patter, it's a 4-minute singing call, that's it. The focus is always on whatever the lowest level is, and it's always they get every second tip. That's just mine. Betsy, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was going to say also, it depends. Now I work for the gay clubs in New York and Philadelphia, and when they do dances, they do multiple programs depending on who's there. And my answer to there some of them want every third tip, so it would be mainstream, say mainstream plus advanced, and I'm like, oh good, are you going to charge the people who dance mainstream less? And they say, why? I said, because they can't dance the other 2 tips. Well, the other people are only getting a certain amount of dancing at their program. I said, yes, but they are able to dance every single set. Yep. So the advanced people can dance the mainstream, and the advanced people can dance the plus if they choose to. If they choose not to, that's their choice. The people who dance mainstream can dance when it's mainstream.
Yeah. And I always look at, I'll bet you're charging the same to come in the door though, don't they?
Oh yeah, I said that to somebody one time at a club where this one club had gotten themselves into doing mainstream and plus, and they hadn't intended to do that.
I look at it as going into an all-you-can-eat restaurant buffet, and you go in, you pay the same price as everybody else, but you're being told you're only allowed to eat the salad bar. You're only allowed to eat the salad bar, and the main and the soup table, you're allowed to eat everything, but you're all paying the same price.
Exactly. But this one club, they hadn't intended to alternate between mainstream and plus, but they had some people come out and they wanted to add to how many people were on the floor, so they let the mainstream people come in and started alternating tips. And then some of the people who danced plus wanted more plus. So this poor president came up to me and said, "Now this time we want you to do a mainstream and then 2 plus tips and then a mainstream and 2 plus tips." And I said to this poor woman who was being driven by the vocal people who wanted all plus, I said, "Are you going to charge the mainstream people less?" And she said, "Why?" And I explained why, because they could only dance, basically, if I'm going to get 7 tips in the evening, they can dance 3 of them. That's not fair.
Mm-hmm.
They actually went back. I said, if you don't want to do mainstream, then tell the mainstream people they can't come anymore. Don't take their money.
Yep.
Well, you mentioned, I noticed you mentioned 7 tips in the evening. Is that with rounds or something?
Yes.
When we did that format, there's no rounds and there's no breaks.
I understand.
So it's like 5 or 6 tips an hour.
Oh, I understand that. When I was working for classes for Independence Squares in Philadelphia, they were running 2 rooms. They're trying to maximize what they can do for their dancers on their class nights. And they were running 2 rooms, and they were running mainstream plus advanced and C1. And in one room was the C1 class and the mainstream DVD workshop, and the other room I think was alternating plus and advanced, and then they shifted, and then we went into quarantine. But basically every 15 minutes the rooms changed and the tips changed, and that included instruction. So in a 2-hour dance you had, actually I think you had 9 tips.
Just where you said the plus people wanted more dancing, I mean, most of the plus moves are just mainstream moves put together. So you could always say to the plus people, right, I'm going to give you a challenge. The next tip will be mainstream, but you try and pick the plus moves in there. So you could call plus moves as mainstream, and that would be their challenge. So they're still getting their plus, but they're only doing mainstream.
That's a possibility. But the people
I tried that once, but what always ended up happening is your plus and advanced dancers were swing through, girls circulate, boys train. Oh, that's an AC-doocy.
Yeah.
And somebody would go, oh, it won an AC-doocy after that. And it started out as a good idea, but it didn't actually work. But that was just a couple of the dances. I was interested when you say you get 7 tips a night. If I'm doing a split program, which I used to do, which was basic and mainstream, new dancer mainstream. The dance was 2.5 hours, and it was a minimum of 14 tips. Now I never did tips more than 10 minutes in length. That gave me 8 minutes of calling, 2-minute break between tips to allow the dancers to shift. You know, with the exception of teaching nights, which we did have because it was always a 3-hour dance. That's what, and it was always everybody there at the floor. I'm just wondering why they.
Chris called it rounds.
Ah, right. Okay.
We had rounds in between.
Yep, that works.
And the rounds take another 10 minutes. Even if the cuer is ready with their music and gets up right away, each piece of music for rounds is 3 minutes or 3.5 minutes. So that's 7 minutes. And by the time you change people, it comes up to 8 or 9 minutes.
Yeah, no, got it. I was thinking about the rounds, and I'm a proponent of rounds are part of square dancing. When
You
when they proposed the combined format to me, this is why the dance went, and they had a half-hour round dance, which was just round dancers at the beginning, and then we had two round dances, or sorry, single round dances between the basic mainstream round. That's a single round, basic mainstream, single round, basic mainstream, single round, and that was just for my break.
around here by me, it's about 5 or 6 tips is average. If you get 7 tips in a night, that was a really good night. And the
How long are the
reason
hours?
is it takes them so long to fill the squares. You stand up there for 5 minutes trying to get one more couple out there.
Yeah, that the groups that I was talking about, there's not even a 2-minute break. You know, you say, you know, bow to the partner, you know, you're done, and within like 30 seconds, the next group of people is up there going, "Let's go."
Yep. Yeah, that's what I got is I wanted the 2-minute break, but it was always you'd finish the tip and the mainstream would be up. You finish this tip and the basic dancers are already starting to get up, you know, and it's okay. It works well.
And that's fine. Now the real trick in doing something like that as the caller is to keep track of what program you are using.
Yeah. Oh,
And
yeah. That's a lot of work.
I actually, this helps me, although I don't actually look at it. I have printed my basic mainstream plus advanced lists, and I have printed them on different color paper. And if I'm calling a dance where it's going to be mainstream and plus and advanced, then I have 3 lists on the table, and whichever one is on top is the one I'm calling now.
Yeah.
And looking at the color of the paper reminds me not to call the calls off the other list.
I used to do something almost exactly the same, but what I had were anti-lists. I had the list of you can't call these.
Oh no, I don't like. I can't deal with negative like that. I just these are the calls I can call. Period.
I've seen that. I agree with you 100% on that one, Betsy. One of the big novelty what is it, exercises for callers at caller schools. You start off, call this, and then they start taking movements away. And all you seem to be able to do is focus on what was taken away instead of what you can do. Don't use right and left through. You know you're going to try and use it.
Oh yeah.
It just
that was my
like you
as
with
I
star
said,
through.
That was my problem with slide through and star through when I was first using the condensed teaching order, was I had to remember to say slide through.
Yeah.
Could you, by the way, could you go back and elaborate a little bit about, you were talking about a mistake that you thought you made or somebody made with regards to that CTM list with the star through and the slide through. What were you saying about that again?
Okay, the condensed teaching order, the CTO, does not have star through on it.
Right, right.
And so you are supposed to use slide through once you've taught it. And I use star through a lot. And to control my mouth, you know, your negative list, Chris, would have said, don't call star through, which of course would mean that my mouth would say star through all the time.
I taught the CTM, I don't know, maybe, I don't know, like 5 times or something, but I just added star through to it.
Nope.
May I ask why you try to use star through that much? Because I try to avoid it. I only use it if I have 4 girls in the center, square through 3, star through with the boys. But otherwise, I don't use it because it's always a bad hand afterwards for some.
I think if it's taught properly, it's a very comfortable dance, but we don't teach styling like it used to be taught in the same way that it used to be taught, where the dances and the movements flow. There's always that argument of star through, square through is comfortable because of the hand position at the end of a star through, whereas square through, star through is uncomfortable because of the position. Now that's going back quite a while, but how dancers were taught and the styling and the timing of the movements was very, very different back then to what it is now. I think star through is just left off the list because slide through does the same, and it can do more as you advance. I think that was probably the reason it was taken
And
off.
the older ladies don't disapprove of it.
Yeah.
Actually, I got more comfortable using the star through when the home club Rutgers Promenaders had a group of young people for a while. And when I watched a teenage girl who had to duck really low to get under the arm of the young boy who hadn't had his growth spurt yet, I said, we need to teach slide through right now. Because if the teenage girl has to duck that low, none of the rest of us the parents may not be able to.
When I was taught star through the same as dive through, we were taught it as the hands make contact, but if there's a height disparity, you do a release and a recontact. You know, that was part of the styling that was taught. Jeff, you had your hand up.
Yeah, does anyone? I don't differentiate between A1 and A2. Initially, when plus came out, it was +1, +2, and I didn't see any value in that either. So I don't differentiate between A1 and A2. I put them all in the one bracket.
Now,
I do the same thing. Advanced originally was just one list. The A1 and A2 differentiation came much later.
Yeah. And that was mainly because of the size of the list. But what do you do now when you go to a dance and it's an A1 dance?
I've got to think about it.
I have an advantage in, I've been asked to go and call advanced dances, which are A1 and A2. I don't dance A2, I don't call A2, but I've been lucky so far that very few callers have actually picked me up on that.
I created a yellow list.
Fair enough.
I took the alphabetical list of the Color Lab alphabetical list. I opened it up on my computer and I took all the A1 and I copied that to another piece of paper. Then I made the font a lot larger and put it in 2 columns and printed it on yellow paper as A1.
When I was doing that, I would have the A1 and the A2 side by side, and one section, the top section. So it's a 2-column layout, and A1 on the left and A2 on the right, and the order that the calls appeared in at the top would be in a larger, bigger font, would be what I consider to be the big feature calls of that level, and then after that, then I would have the calls. But it's as you know, it's kind of hard to glance back and forth and at lists like that while you're calling.
And that's partially why I put them in alphabetical order, because it's easier to look on a list in alphabetical order than it is in a teaching order or the big fancy calls or whatever. I can find alphabetical order much easier than anything else to look at.
I liked the feature calls because then I could look down there and because my question is, I'm thinking in about a call and a half, maybe I'll call transfer the column, but let me just look real quick and see which side that's on. And that would be one of the
That's A1.
one of the big ones. It's easy to find.
I actually keep my list in teaching order because then I know that regardless of there are new ones or experienced ones, I know where to more or less look where I should find the calls I want to use. But occasionally it's also in my teaching order, which might not be the same as Caller Labs, but that's okay.
Yes. And actually, now how do you say your first name?
Gugge.
Say again.
Gugge.
Gugge?
Yeah.
Actually, Gugge, when I'm invited to a club and they roll out the statement, "Oh, hello, we've invited our class." It's like, oh, good. What do they know? Well, I will fall back on the teaching order and I will start calling the first tip with calls that are way early in the teaching order. And then each tip after that for the new people, I introduce a few more calls until I get up to the newest ones, because that way they succeed as they learn to dance to somebody other than their teacher.
See, that's where people like Goget and myself screw you all up, because we do some alternate teaching order. And so when you walk in, and that happens all the time. You go to the club and they're like, oh, here's a list of things they know. And it's some arbitrary list, and it's a challenge.
At least they give you a list.
Yeah.
I've been there, and I've been invited to a club, and you walk in the door, they say, hello, we've invited our class. Good. Do you have a list of what they know? You need
It's probably the new comprehensive SSD list that's out somewhere in a club somewhere.
Because we have 3 callers at our club, when we're doing learners, I actually, after the Friday night, I'll adjust the teaching list and I'll send them a copy by email. So they've got it a week beforehand, or at least 5 days beforehand, to work out, I can call this or call that. And I think it's courtesy if you've got learners to do that to the caller.
Exactly.
We have 3 or 4 callers as well, and we make sure that we have decided beforehand which calls to do at which day and so on.
And I share the home club, the Rutgers Promenaders, with another caller. And not only do we do that, but he established a website where on the website we would fill in what had been taught that week. So if somebody had missed the class, they could perhaps study in advance, so before they came back and were falling behind. So it was also a useful tool. If he forgot to send me what he taught, I could look on the website, and he gave me the keys to enter into that particular website.
Scotty, you're very quiet over there.
Sorry?
I said, Scotty, you're very quiet over there.
I'm always very quiet.
Anything to add?
Yeah. No, before
Yeah, Scotty and I are watchers, not talkers.
Before Caller Lab brought out a list for Plus, I had taught mainstream, and then people wanted something a little bit harder, so we put other moves in on a separate night, and there were all types of calls that came, and we taught them and danced them. And then about a year later, Caller Lab brought out their +1 and +2. And then we diverse to that, but some of the people like some of the other movements, like walk the plank and whatever, we stuck them in as well.
Yeah. That was the heyday of the quarterlies and the experimentals all coming out at the same time.
Please.
Yeah. There was a whole heap of moves that I'd found or were given by some of the older callers around the country, and we used them. But as I say now, I don't differentiate between A1 and A2. And the advantage I have is that no other caller in our state calls above plus anyway. So
That solves that.
Most of the advanced dancing, almost all of it up where I was when I was teaching advanced a lot, they were all A2 clubs, and so everybody who said, we're going to learn advanced, they were going to learn the whole thing anyway. So
yeah,
I would just teach it all at once and go in whatever order made sense to me.
Yeah.
Well, I actually, when I was teaching advanced, I would try and get through to where I could identify for the people that they had learned all of the calls on A1. So in case they went someplace where somebody was going to do a tip, they could say, can you call A1, and maybe get some practice into somebody else. But I didn't necessarily do all of A1 before I did A2.
No.
I definitely announced, maybe that's the same thing as I'm thinking. I definitely announced to them when they've completed A1, but by the time I say that, they also know a bunch of A2 calls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have
No,
a funny,
Oh,
I have a funny
sorry.
story going back, and then I'll shut up. I have a funny story going back to when it was +1 and +2. I live in northern New Jersey, which is close to New York State, and there was a club in New York City, actually on Staten Island, and they were a +1 club. So I went out there. Well, whoever taught them didn't differentiate when they made diamonds. And so they made diamonds, and I'm calling away, and I'm like, they made little stars. They had no knowledge of where the centers and the points were in a diamond. And I'm calling away, and I went, oh my gosh, that means I can only call flip the diamond, which was on +1, if I can call it from standard position, because they can't do it if I don't call it from standard position. Trouble was, I had no clue as to what standard position was, so I called the entire night without ever calling flip the diamond.
The question is,
Well,
did
they'd
anybody notice?
have trouble with facing diamonds, wouldn't they?
Oh yeah.
What did they do with the diamonds?
They made little stars.
Okay, and then?
Well, I basically called them. I had the center girls hinge, diamonds circulate, and those in the wave swing through, and then those in the wave cast off 3/4, and blah blah blah. I never called flip the diamond for the entire dance.
Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, I hate to pull pin on this, but we are running out of time. If you want, I can leave the chat room open for discussion. If not, unfortunately, I'm going to have to beetle on out of here. But if you would like me to leave the chat room open, I can do that. But I'm going to have to sign off and go.